Today we'll be looking at how to create 3D scrolling text. You can use this text in, say, a credit screen or an about screen, or perhaps even a splash screen. Now we'll be animating text, but you can also apply these 3D techniques to other objects for your own animations. So the example I've got here is the Star Wars crawl text. And I'll just play that to give you an idea of what the end result will be. Now I've added a background, just a stars background. I've also added the music as well for added effect. There we go, very inspiring. Now I'm going to step you through how to create this text. So I'm going to go to a new scene. On this scene, I've already got a black background. My stage is set to black. And I've also created this text earlier. Now to create that text, I just use Flash's text tool, and I'm just dragging the properties up here so you can see what font family I use. TWSenMT, bold, and color was just a bright plain yellow color. So I'll just drag that back down and we'll continue. So I've just created that text using Flash. So I'm going to go back to my timeline, and we will be using a motion tween for this animation, 3D animation. But before we do that, I'm just going to start with my text off the screen because it is scrolling credits. We want to scroll them from the bottom to the top. So that should be good enough there. And the first tool we're going to use is the 3D rotation tool. Okay, so just select that. And we're going to adjust some values, the 3D values, using this tool. Actually, before we do that, we first have to turn this text into a symbol. So you can right click on your text and go to convert to symbol, F8. And it doesn't matter what you call it, just put anything in there. Okay, so now that I've converted it to a symbol, I can use the 3D rotation tool. Now the 3D rotation tool is fairly intuitive, but there's a couple of gotchas, and let's have a look at it. So this axis here, this vertical axis, now according to geometry, you probably think it's the y-axis, but no, it's actually the x-axis. And when you hover your mouse over it, you may be able to see it, but it's just got a small x there. So when I move, well, click and drag on the x-axis, it's flipping my text over the x-axis. Okay, and you can press Ctrl Z just to undo anything while you're experimenting with this. Here we've got our y-axis. Again, you'd think it'd be the x-axis, but it's actually the y-axis. And if you adjust that one, it spins it around on the y-axis. Okay, Ctrl Z. And you've also got the blue line, blue circle here. That's your z-axis. So that's just spinning it around. Okay, and Control Z. Now this one on the outer, that is actually for all three of the axes. So X, Y, and Z. So you can move it around all the axes at one time. Okay, for our text, we just want to adjust the x-axis. Okay, so not that way, to the right here. And you don't have to get exactly like the Star Wars text, but just get close enough. Okay, that'll do. So this is basically our starting state for our motion tween. So we have to think about how long we want our motion tween to run for. And I'm going to say about 15 seconds. So at 30 frames per second, which I set my Flash program to, I'm going to need 450 frames. So I'll just scroll along until I find 450. And there it is. And I can just right click there and go insert frame. Okay. And then we can right click on the frames and go create motion tween. Okay. So with our motion tween, we've got a starting frame here and we want an ending frame. as well. So at the very end of my animation, I'm just going to insert a keyframe and all there. Okay, so with this text, we obviously want it to scroll upward, but we also want it to fade into the distance as well. So I'm going to use now the 3D translation tool. So I'm going to use that tool to move the text up. And I'll just scroll up a bit more. And a little more. Okay, that's good. And I'll scroll up that far. And you can actually use the properties as well. I'll just move that up a second so you make sure you can see it. Okay, the 3D position and view, the Z index there, that's what I'm adjusting at the moment. So I'm just going to type in 800 there, that's good enough. So you can play around with these values, but if you get a basic animation going, and then you can adjust the values later. Just move these down. Okay, now let's just play that. Well, actually, before we play it, like other motion tweens, if we've got multiple scenes, and I do on this occasion, well, first I want to move this scene to the front. Okay, now as soon as this animation is completed, we're going to go to our other scenes, and I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to my timeline. I'm going to create a new layer, call it Actions. Okay, and in the frame just after 450, I'm going to insert a keyframe there. And then after I've inserted a keyframe, I can add some code. So window actions and just type in there, stop. Okay. And I'll just delete that one. No, that can stay. That's for the other scene. Okay, so returning to my timeline. Now I can play that through and we should see a basic animation happening. Now that looks pretty good. I won't actually make any more changes to that, but you could certainly can. Actually, one thing we will do is we do want the text to fade into nothing. So if I'm scrolling through this, in our end state here, you can see that you can actually still see the text here. We want it to fade well before we get to the end of the animation. So I'm going to go to about frame 300. I'm just going to insert a keyframe there and all. Okay, so I'm inserting a keyframe. The reason for that is at this point I want to start fading the text, and to fade the text you use transparency, or in Flash they call it alpha. So if I go to the properties now, and I'll just scroll this up a bit so you can see it. We want to start changing. Actually, I'll just make sure I've got selected the right tool. Okay, I've selected the right tool there, selection tool, and I'm changing the color effect. I'll just scroll down a bit more. So where it says color effect and style, I'm going to change that to alpha. Okay, and 100% alpha means there's no fade at all. Okay, I'll just pop this back in. And we can just pop that in. Okay. On my timeline, frame 300, I've set the alpha to 100%, so we're not fading at that point. But we are at the end. So if I go to here now, my final frame, go to properties again, and just make sure I've selected my symbol on the last frame of the timeline. and I can reduce the transparency. Let's bring that up a bit more. I can reduce that all the way down to 0, and that will fade the text. It's completely faded there, as you can see now. So let's just run that again and see if it's any better. So you can see the text is fading. Very good. So just some final touches now. Now I'll just go back to the timeline. So we've got the actions layer. That's just got to stop in frame 451. And layer 1 has our motion tween. Just going to create another layer and just going to call it background. And that's going to contain our stars background. And so I've got an image I imported earlier, but what you can do with any image, go File, Import to Library. And now I previously imported this image, so I'll just find it down here. And background. Okay, I'm just dragging that from my library onto my stage. Let's go back to the timeline. And I'm just going to make sure it fills up my stage. And I'll just use Control-T to transform it, just to drag it out. Okay. And we want to maintain the aspect ratio. So hold down Shift to maintain the aspect ratio. So as long as it's covering up your stage, that's fine. Okay, that's fine. Go back to my timeline. I do have to adjust my layers. So I have to put my background at the bottom because we want the text to occur at the top, of course. And let's go back to just make sure that's all right. Okay, the final touch was the music. Now, I found if I go to my library, I imported this Star Wars opening earlier, and I went to Properties, ActionScript, and I clicked this Export for ActionScript, and I gave it the class name Opening. Okay, and that's what you do for any sound. Give it a class name so that you can work with those sounds in ActionScript. Okay, and if I go to my document class I created earlier as well, and I'll go to Properties, and just call it About, and we'll just drag this all the way down. Okay, you can see my code here. So I've got just create a new instance of the opening sound and play it. Okay, so let's play it one more time. There we go, fantastic.